Good morning. This morning we're going to go back to our study in Genesis, and we left off with finishing up Genesis 39, where Joseph was imprisoned um, in Egypt. And Genesis 40, we find Joseph active even in prison. Genesis 40 reads this way: As time went on, it happened that the cupbearer and the baker of the king, Egypt, crossed their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was furious with his two officials, the head cupbearer and the head baker, and put them in custody under the captain of the guard. It was the jail time, the same jail where Joseph was held. The captain of the guard assigned Joseph to see to their needs. After they had been in custody for a while, the king's cupbearer and baker had a dream the same night. Each dream had its own meaning. When Joseph arrived in the morning, he noticed they were feeling low. So he asked them, the two officials of Pharaoh who had been thrown into jail with him, "What's wrong? Why the long faces?" They said, "We dream dreams, and there's no one to interpret them." Joseph said, "Don't interpretations come from God? Tell me the dreams." First, the head cupbearer told his dream to Joseph. "In my dream, there was a vine in front of me with 3 branches on it. It budded, blossomed, and clustered, ripened into grapes. I was holding Pharaoh's cup. I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup to Pharaoh." Joseph said, "Here's the meaning. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will get you out of here and put you back to your old job. You'll be giving Pharaoh his cup, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. Only remember me when things are going well with you again. Tell Pharaoh about me and get me out of this place. I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and since I've been here, I have done nothing to deserve being put in this hole." When the head baker saw how well Joseph's interpretation turned out for the cupbearer, he also spoke up. "My dream went like this. I saw 3 wicker baskets on my head. The top basket had assorted pastries from the baker, and the birds were picking at them from the basket on my head." Joseph said, "This is the interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will take off your head, impale you on a post, and the birds will pick your bones clean." And sure enough, on the 3rd day it was Pharaoh's birthday, and he threw a feast for all his servants. He set the head cupbearer and the head baker in places of honor in the presence of all his guests. Then he restored the head cupbearer to his cupbearing post. He handed Pharaoh his cup just as before, and then he impaled the head baker on a post, following Joseph's interpretation exactly. But the head cupbearer never gave Joseph another thought. He forgot all about him. When we talked about Joseph last, he was put into prison unjustly. He had tried to keep himself from doing any wrong, yet once again things turned against him. The first would have been when his brothers sold him into Egypt. But since God was in charge, even in prison, Joseph was still protected. It is quite obvious that he had gained favor in prison with the head guard, too. In chapter 40, 2 others from Pharaoh's workforce ended up in prison because Pharaoh got angry with them. It is quite obvious that Pharaoh was one of those leaders who acted and reacted in a moment and never gave a second thought to what he said or did. So 2 of his very important officials ended up in prison just like that. And then it tells us one night they each had a dream. Their dreams obviously left them troubled when they awakened in the morn. When Joseph arrived, they were pretty down in the mouth, and Joseph reached out to them to try and help them. They each had had dreams, and when they shared them with Joseph, God gave Joseph the ability to understand what each dream meant. One was definitely more positive than the other. Joseph only had one request, and that was that the cupbearer would tell Pharaoh about him when he regained his job back. However, the cupbearer forgot all about Joseph when he was back at his job. So Joseph remained in prison. How often do you and I feel that injustice has been done to us? How do we feel right at this moment? With the unwanted situation that we find ourselves living in. What is going through our minds and our spirits? When will this be over? How long can we live like this? Why can't God just wipe this out? There are so many questions that any one of us could ask. So let us ask this question in regards to Joseph. Joseph was thrown into prison because someone accused him of doing something he had never done. He had only lived a life that honored God to the best of his ability. You and I have been trying to live our lives for God here today in this world. Yet now, through no fault of ours, we find ourselves caught in an unwanted imprisonment. This is not just you and I. It is something that is basically worldwide. So in some respects, we are like Joseph, in a place we do not feel we deserve to be, wondering what or how God is going to get us out of this so-called undeserved imprisonment. So what can we learn from Joseph today? Number 1, Joseph remained faithful to God in his undeserved confinement. He did not change his character, but once again showed himself trustworthy. And consequently, he was given responsibility and God blessed him. You and I can accept the challenge that God has given to us today and in days ahead. Yes, we are being told by someone in authority over us to continue to self-quarantine, not only for our own health, but for the health of others. If we have jobs that are deemed necessary in providing for the needs of people in our society, we are to continue to work, but are also expected to follow the rules that are in place for protection of all. This is being faithful to God. Number 2, Joseph continued to treat people around him with respect and help them in any way he could. We are not told much about what happened during his imprisonment up to this time, but he obviously had found favor with the head of the prison, as it says he was in charge of the cupbearer and the cake baker. The captain of the guards had in some respects made Joseph almost like an employee of his to care for some of the prisoners. God had been with Joseph all along in his life, and we have seen that in how God has intervened so many times already. God also had given Joseph the ability to understand his own dreams in the past. So he was open to trying to help the 2 men who were troubled with their dreams. So he listened, and he honestly told them one would get his job back while the other would have his life taken. Joseph only had one request of these men, particularly the cupbearer, as he would get his job back, and that was for the king to be told that Joseph was unjustly imprisoned. But as it often happens, when life gets back to normal and good, we forget about what we've promised to God, and possibly others and even ourselves. And so Joseph remained in prison and confinement unjustly. 3, today I want to challenge each one of us as individuals. How are we embracing our confinement? Are you following the rules and the protocol that has been put in place for your protection as well as for the protection of others? Number 4, what is your spirit like? Are you exhibiting godlike behavior? Or do you find yourself frustrated, angry, short-tempered, yelling, blaming, making your home a place of chaos and confusion? Are you rather open to employing God's peace, God's presence, and God's character? This is where it gets serious, my friends. Yes, we may feel imprisoned. We may feel that life is unjust. But each one of us needs to make a choice. And if we claim to be a follower of Jesus, then, my friends, it needs to be a godly choice. Let me share these thoughts on imprisonment with you. Imprisoned, not a word one cares to hear and or entertain for oneself, for a family member, friend, or anyone. Somehow it has that feeling of what I want to call hanging in an imaginary abyss. Now, if one is truly imprisoned within walls, therein lies another struggle. Was it because of something I did? And if so, even if I do not want to, I must face and pay my dues. Or was it because of someone I was with and what they chose to do? Now, this may make the challenge a bit more difficult. Yet once again, I am reminded that it will require a choice on my part. Do I cooperate and trust God that truth will prevail? Or do I become belligerent and defiant, seeking to make a statement, yet only to find my life to become more miserable? Joseph in the book of Genesis was such a man. First, he was sold into confinement by his brothers, who hoped never to see him again. Then he was acquired by a wealthy man in a foreign land as a slave, only once again to face confinement. Confinement from the master's wife that he chose to flee. Yet the tables turned once again as the woman lied, and Joseph again found himself in confinement. Confinement in real prison walls, where care, compassion, and understanding was limited. No doubt because most of the prisoners were uncooperative and even rebelled. But Joseph accepted his fate, and it seems that he gained favor with the head of the prison. And it was observed that Joseph was different. He was not an ordinary prisoner. He was imprisoned unjustly because of the choice and action of another. Yet he rose to embrace his faith in God even then. And in the end, he finds God is faithful. Then one morning, Joseph was alerted to two troubled prisoners under his care. He went to have a talk with them. As Joseph listened to the king's cupbearer and baker, he realized that they had had dreams and they were troubling them. Joseph listened to them as they talked. Joseph opened his spirit to God above, and God told Joseph the cupbearer would be restored, but the baker would be killed. Joseph asked for only one thing in return, and that was for the cupbearer to alert the king to Joseph's whereabouts. But as so often happens with us as humans, the cupbearer enjoyed his reinstatement so much, he forgot that Joseph even existed. And well, that is the end of the story for today. But there just may be a takeaway from this story for you and I today. So the edict has been given to us. You must shelter in place. Stay in your home and or residence with family only. The only reason to leave is for jobs considered necessary and for one to get necessities needed to live. Oh, and one more thing. Practice social distancing, 6 feet from one another and no physical contact. These precautions are listed for self-protection as well as for the protection of others. Obedience to these new standards, Joseph would tell us to embrace. It is how we show the world we are obedient disciples and followers of Jesus Christ. My friends, These days, restrictions and rules are not to be taken lightly, and I want to close with a personal example. I myself have been fighting health issues the past 2 months now. As soon as the shelter and home was in place, I realized I had a much larger responsibility than myself. It was also for others. For 5 or 6 weeks, I had no appetite. I was weak. I wondered from time to time, do I have the coronavirus? But even as I was seeing medical personnel, there seemed no need from them for me to be tested. So I sequestered at home, maintained distance with my husband as a precaution. I ordered masks. I am feeling healthier now, although still struggle with a tag-along cough at times. Yet in my mind I wonder, because of the nature of this virus, did I have it? Am I a carrier? And if you are not tested when you are ill, in some respects you become imprisoned, whether quarantined or not. But I also have been challenged by Joseph as he continued to be faithful to God and follow the rules in spite of what seemed like injustice, in spite of feeling forgotten. And so I now see God has opened some doors of ministry to me that are limited because of social distancing, but I can still be God's presence to those I meet, especially when I'm out walking my dog. So, my friends, I call each of you, take some time today, look within your own spirit, and ask yourself these questions. Number 1, am I truly embracing my situation right now? I remind you, Joseph did. Number 2, am I keeping a godlike attitude in my home so that our home is a haven of peace and love? Joseph did that where he was at. Number 3, even if the end of the story is different than you want, are you open to accept it? Joseph did. He still had to remain in prison. We do not know how long we will have to maintain a stay-at-home or distancing rule. But are you open to accept what is set forth? Amen. God, thank you for the example that we have in the scriptures of people who obeyed and followed rules even when there was injustice served. Help each one of us to be able to be faithful to you in this crisis that we find ourselves in. May we continue to trust you and be open to what you want to do in our lives and through our lives. Give us strength, give us courage, give us wisdom, and most of all, give us love for all that are around us and all that we meet and who we work with and who we serve. In Jesus' name, amen.